The phone rang at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other. Amelia Rodriguez was hunched over her laptop in the cramped break room of Henderson Marketing Solutions, picking at a sad desk salad while reviewing client proposals. At 24, she'd already learned that lunch breaks were luxuries she couldn't afford if she wanted to climb out of her entry-level coordinator position. The unknown number flashing on her phone screen almost went to voicemail. She'd been dodging calls from her student loan servicer all week. "This is Amelia," she answered, expecting another robotic reminder about her overdue payment. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Janet Miller from TransUnion Credit Services. I'm calling regarding some unusual activity on your credit report that requires immediate verification." The words hit her like ice water. Amelia's hand trembled slightly as she set down her plastic fork. In her 2 years of adult financial responsibility, she'd never received a call like this. Her credit history was embarrassingly thin. One student credit card she barely used and those looming student loans, but clean. Unusual activity? I don't understand. What kind of activity? "Ma'am, we're showing a recent inquiry and account opening for a significant loan amount. I need to verify if you authorized a $97,000 business loan application with Mountain Vista Capital last month." The break room seemed to tilt. $97,000. The number echoed in her head like a fire alarm. Amelia had never heard of Mountain Vista Capital, had never applied for any loan, let alone one that exceeded her annual salary by more than double. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ancient refrigerator. "I never applied for any loan." What happened next would unravel everything Amelia thought she knew about trust, family, and the devastating power of identity theft. But more than that, it would force her to confront a truth she'd been avoiding for years, that her older sister Victoria's recent lifestyle changes weren't the result of a promotion like she'd claimed.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Amelia Rodriguez had always lived in the shadow of expectations she couldn't quite meet. Growing up in the sun-baked suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, she was the younger daughter who tried too hard, studied too long, and worried too much about everything. Her parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, had immigrated from Mexico in the 1980s and built a modest life through relentless work. He as a mechanic, she as a seamstress, taking in alterations from their garage-converted shop. The Rodriguez family valued two things above all else: hard work and family loyalty. These principles had been drilled into both daughters from childhood, whispered in Spanish during late-night conversations, and reinforced through countless sacrifices. When money was tight, they shared. When someone succeeded, they all celebrated. When trouble came, they faced it together. Victoria, 3 years older than Amelia, had always been the golden child. She was naturally charismatic, effortlessly beautiful, and possessed an entrepreneurial spirit that their parents admired even when her ventures failed. While Amelia buried herself in textbooks, Victoria was launching Instagram businesses, networking at local events, and talking about building her brand. Their parents' eyes would light up when Victoria described her latest scheme, even as Amelia quietly worried about the credit cards Victoria kept applying for. After high school, Victoria had bounced between community college and various jobs: retail manager at a boutique, social media coordinator for a local restaurant, briefly a real estate assistant. Nothing seemed to stick, but Victoria always talked about the next big opportunity, the next level she was going to reach. She moved out at 21 into a studio apartment in Scottsdale, closer to what she called the action. Amelia had taken the traditional path. She'd earned a business degree from Arizona State University, graduating with a 3.7 GPA and $31,000 in student debt. She'd moved back home afterwards, saving money while working at Henderson Marketing Solutions, a mid-sized firm in Tempe. Her plan was simple: pay down debt, build her credit, save for a small apartment, maybe pursue an MBA in a few years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was responsible. For the past year, though, Victoria's life had taken a dramatic upswing that made Amelia feel even more behind. Her sister had moved into a sleek, one-bedroom apartment in Old Town Scottsdale, the kind of place with a pool and a gym that cost more per month than Amelia made. Her Instagram feed became a carousel of expensive dinners, weekend trips to California, and shopping hauls featuring designer handbags that cost more than Amelia's monthly student loan payment. "I got promoted to regional sales manager," Victoria had explained during their last family dinner 2 months ago. She had arrived 30 minutes late in a new Audi, apologizing breathlessly while showing off a Cartier watch that caught the kitchen light. "The commission structure is incredible. I'm finally getting the recognition I deserve." Their parents had beamed with pride. Carlos had clapped Victoria's on the shoulder, telling her in Spanish how proud he was that his daughter was succeeding in America. Maria had immediately started planning a celebration dinner, already mentally calculating how much extra rice and beans to make for the extended family they'd invite. Amelia had smiled and congratulated her sister, but something felt off. Victoria worked for a small marketing consultancy that handled local businesses, restaurants, law firms, dental practices. Even with a promotion, the math didn't seem to add up. The Audi alone was worth more than most people in Victoria's industry made in a year. But questioning your sister's success felt petty, especially when your parents were so happy.
"Maybe I should ask Victoria for advice about getting into sales," Amelia had mentioned to her mother while doing dishes after that dinner. Maria had nodded enthusiastically. "She's always been good with people. You're smart, mija, but Victoria knows how to make people want things. Maybe she can teach you." Amelia had nodded, but privately wondered if she even wanted to learn that particular skill. She preferred the quiet satisfaction of solving problems behind the scenes, of building something solid and sustainable. Victoria's world of commissions and networking events felt like a performance she wasn't sure she wanted to join. Still, the contrast between their lives was becoming harder to ignore. While Amelia packed peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and calculated whether she could afford to meet friends for happy hour, Victoria was posting photos from weekend getaways and expensive brunches. Their parents would show these photos to neighbors and church friends, glowing with pride about their successful daughter. Amelia tried not to feel jealous. She tried to focus on her own steady progress. The small raises at work, the gradual decrease in her student loan balance, the emergency fund she was slowly building. But it was hard not to feel like she was moving in slow motion, while Victoria's life accelerated into something glamorous and enviable. The truth was, Amelia had always been a worrier. Even as a child, she was the one who reminded everyone about homework deadlines and worried about whether they'd lock the front door. Her parents called it being responsible, but it often felt like being trapped in a cage of anxiety while everyone else lived freely. This tendency toward worry had made her exceptionally cautious with money. She checked her credit report monthly through the free service, tracked every expense in a budgeting app, and had never missed a payment on anything. Her credit score wasn't high, she simply didn't have enough history, but it was clean. She was proud of that, even if it meant her financial life moved at a snail's pace. Victoria had always been different. She saw money as a tool to be leveraged, not something to be carefully hoarded. "You have to spend money to make money," she would say, a phrase that made Amelia's stomach clench with anxiety. Victoria had always been comfortable with risk in ways that Amelia envied, but couldn't emulate. That Tuesday afternoon, sitting in the Henderson marketing break room with Janet Miller's voice explaining impossible loan applications, Amelia felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. The methodical approach to life that had always made her feel safe suddenly seemed naive. If someone could simply use her identity to borrow nearly 6 figures, what protection did caution really offer? "Ms. Rodriguez, are you still there?" Janet's voice brought her back to the moment. "Yes, I'm here. I need to understand what's happening. If I didn't apply for this loan, then who did?" "That's exactly what we need to determine. Identity theft is unfortunately common, and the details on this application are quite comprehensive. Someone had access to your social security number, date of birth, employment information, and even some financial details that aren't typically public." The words hit Amelia like physical blows. Someone close enough to know her private information.
someone who could answer detailed questions about her life. The list of people with that kind of access was terrifyingly short. As Janet continued explaining the next steps, fraud alerts, police reports, documentation requirements, Amelia's mind was already racing down a path she didn't want to follow. But the evidence was pointing toward a conclusion that would shatter everything she believed about family loyalty and the people she trusted most. The responsible, careful life she'd built wasn't going to protect her from this, and the sister she'd been quietly envying might be the very person who had just destroyed her financial future.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The fraud department at TransUnion had a process, Janet Miller explained in her methodical customer service voice. First, they would place an immediate fraud alert on Amelia's credit file. Then she would need to contact Mountain Vista Capital directly to dispute the loan application. Finally, she should file a police report within 24 hours to establish a paper trail for the investigation. The sooner you act, the better your chances of resolving this without long-term damage to your credit, Janet said. Identity theft cases can take months to fully resolve, but early intervention is key. Months. The word hung in the air like smoke. Amelia had been planning to apply for a small personal loan next month to consolidate her student debt at a lower interest rate. She'd been researching apartments, thinking she might finally be ready to move out of her parents' house by her 25th birthday. All of that was now impossible until this nightmare was resolved. "Can you tell me more about the application details?" Amelia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Like, what information was used? There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicks. The application shows your correct Social Security number, date of birth, and current address. It lists your employer as Henderson Marketing Solutions with your actual salary information. The application also includes references to previous addresses and a bank account number that matches Wells Fargo records. Each detail felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some random scammer who'd bought her information online. This was someone with intimate knowledge of her life, someone who knew where she banked, where she worked, where she lived during college. The circle of people with access to this information was terrifyingly small. "There's something else," Janet continued. "The application loan was submitted with supporting documentation, bank statements, employment verification, even copies of tax returns. Someone put significant effort into making this look legitimate." After ending the call, Amelia sat in the break room for another 10 minutes, staring at her untouched salad. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal. The hum of the microwave, the distant chatter of coworkers, the smell of someone's leftover Chinese food. Her life had just been turned upside down, but the world continued spinning as if nothing had happened. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget dinner Sunday. Victoria is bringing her new boyfriend. Dress nice." The message, so innocent and routine, made Amelia's stomach churn. How could she sit through a family dinner knowing what she now suspected? How could she look Victoria in the eye and pretend everything was normal while her sister had potentially destroyed her financial future? But maybe she was wrong. Maybe this was some elaborate coincidence, or maybe Victoria was a victim too. Maybe someone had gained access to both their personal information. Amelia clung to this possibility as she returned to her desk and tried to focus on the PowerPoint presentation she was supposed to finish by end of day. At 5:30 p.m., Amelia called Mountain Vista Capital from the parking lot of her office building. The company was based in Denver, Colorado, and specialized in small business loans for entrepreneurs and startup ventures. The customer service representative, a woman named Sandra, pulled up the loan application immediately. "Yes, we have an application for Amelia Rodriguez, dated 3 weeks ago. It's for $97,000 to fund a digital marketing consultancy business. The application shows approved status, and the funds were dispersed to the designated business account last Thursday." "Dispersed?" Amelia's voice cracked. You mean the money has already been sent? Yes, ma'am. The loan funds were transferred to the Wells Fargo business account listed on the application. Is there a problem? A problem. Amelia almost laughed at the understatement. Someone had not only used her identity to apply for a massive loan, but had successfully received nearly $100,000 that she was now legally responsible for repaying. I need to speak with your fraud department immediately. This loan application is fraudulent. I never applied for any loan, and I don't have a business or a business account. The next hour was a blur of transferred calls, hold music, and repeating the same information to multiple people. Mountain Vista Capital's fraud department would need written documentation of the dispute, copies of her ID, bank statements proving she didn't have a business account, and a police report number. They would investigate, but the process could take 60 to 90 days. In the meantime, the loan remained active and accruing interest. What about the monthly payments? Amelia asked the fraud investigator, a man named Robert Chen, who spoke in careful, legal-sounding phrases. Unfortunately, until the investigation is complete and fraud is officially determined, you remain responsible for the loan obligations. The first payment of $1,847 is due in 2 weeks.
$1,847. More than Amelia's rent would be if she could afford to move out of her parents' house. More than her monthly take-home pay after taxes and her existing student loan payments. The number was so absurd it felt fictional. By the time she arrived home, Amelia felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped away her insides and left only a shell. Her parents were in the kitchen preparing dinner, the familiar sounds of sizzling oil and her mother's telenovela playing on the small TV on the counter. The smell of cumin and garlic, usually so comforting, now made her nauseous. "Mija, you look terrible," her mother said in Spanish, looking up from the stove where she was browning chicken thighs. "Are you getting sick?" "Just a long day at work," Amelia managed, kissing her mother's cheek. Her father looked up from his newspaper and grunted a greeting, already changed out of his work clothes into the old t-shirt and shorts he wore around the house. The normalcy of the scene felt like torture. Her parents' modest but comfortable life, built on decades of honest work and careful saving, seemed precious and fragile in a way it never had before. They trusted people, believed in fairness, assumed that hard work would be rewarded and that family meant safety. Amelia had believed these things too until a phone call had shattered her faith in all of them. During dinner, her father talked about a customer whose car needed a new transmission, and her mother shared gossip from the church ladies group. They asked about her day, and Amelia mumbled something about busy client projects. She wanted to tell them what had happened, but the words felt too big and terrible to say out loud. How do you tell your parents that someone has stolen your identity and left you responsible for a debt that would take years to pay off? How do you explain that the person who did this might be sitting at their dinner table this Sunday, laughing and sharing stories while wearing jewelry worth more than their father made in a month? After dinner, Amelia retreated to her childhood bedroom, which her parents had left largely unchanged despite her being 24. The same pink walls, the same twin bed with the white wooden headboard, the same bookshelf filled with young adult novels and college textbooks. Sitting there, surrounded by the artifacts of her adolescence, she felt younger and more helpless than she had in years. She opened her laptop and began researching identity theft, fraud disputes, and legal options for victims. The information was overwhelming and largely discouraging. Most cases took months to resolve. Many victims never recovered all the money stolen in their name. Some people's credit scores were permanently damaged by the process. One article mentioned that identity theft by family members was particularly difficult to prosecute because victims were often reluctant to press charges against relatives. The emotional toll was described as devastating. The betrayal of trust compounded the financial damage. Amelia closed the laptop and lay back on her bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars she'd stuck to the ceiling in middle school. They were faded now, barely visible even in the dark, but still there. A reminder of a time when her biggest worry was whether she'd pass her algebra test. Her phone rang. Victoria's name and photo filled the screen.
a glamorous selfie from her recent trip to San Diego. "Hey, little sis." Victoria's voice was bright and cheerful. "Just wanted to see how you're doing. We haven't talked in forever." The casual tone, so normal and sisterly, made Amelia's chest tight. "I'm okay. Just tired from work." "Tell me about it. I've been so swamped with this new client portfolio." "Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. I'm putting together a big presentation next week, and I could use some help with the design work. You're so good with that stuff. Could you maybe help me out? I'd totally pay you, of course." Pay her. The word felt loaded with new meaning. Where would that money come from? What account would Victoria use to write a check?
I don't know, Vicky. Things are pretty crazy right now. Come on. It would just be a few hours this weekend. We could hang out like we used to. I feel like we barely see each other anymore, except at family stuff. The plea in Victoria's voice sounded genuine, but Amelia found herself analyzing every word for hidden meanings. Was this an attempt to seem normal? A way to gauge whether Amelia suspected anything? "Maybe," Amelia said. "Let me see how the week goes." "Perfect. And hey, you're still coming to dinner Sunday, right? I'm dying for you to meet Marcus. He's amazing. He runs his own investment firm. Very successful, very handsome." Victoria laughed, and it sounded exactly like it always had, warm and infectious. Investment firm. Amelia wondered if this Marcus knew about Victoria's sudden wealth, if he was involved somehow, or if he was just another person being deceived by Victoria's new lifestyle. After they hung up, Amelia sat in the dark for a long time. Tomorrow, she would file a police report. She would begin the long, complicated process of proving that someone had stolen her identity and left her responsible for a debt she could never afford to pay. She would have to tell her parents, eventually. She would have to decide whether to confront Victoria directly or let the investigation run its course. But tonight, she allowed herself to grieve for the trust she'd lost, the security she thought she had, and the sister she thought she knew. Tomorrow would bring difficult decisions and uncomfortable truths. Tonight, she just wanted to hold on to the last few hours of believing that family meant safety, that hard work was enough, and that the people you loved would never deliberately hurt you. The glow-in-the-dark stars offered no answers, but they listened to her tears without judgment, just as they had when she was 13 and crying about boys, or 17 and crying about college applications. Some things, at least, remained constant in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. Wednesday morning arrived with the artificial brightness of fluorescent lights and the bitter taste of police station coffee. Amelia sat in the waiting area of the Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, clutching a manila folder containing printed emails, bank statements, and her hastily scrawled timeline of events. The plastic chair squeaked every time she shifted, and she'd been shifting a lot during the 40-minute wait. Detective Luis Morales finally appeared, a stocky man in his 50s, with kind eyes and the wary expression of someone who'd heard every possible variation of human deception. His desk was buried under case files, and when he cleared a space for Amelia's documents, she caught glimpses of other people's financial nightmares: credit card fraud, investment scams, elderly victims who'd lost their life savings to romance cons. "Identity theft by a family member," Detective Morales said after reviewing her paperwork. "Unfortunately, we see this more often than people think. It's one of the hardest types of fraud to prosecute because victims are reluctant to press charges against relatives. But I haven't accused anyone specific yet," Amelia said quickly. "I just know that someone close to me had to have done this." Detective Morales nodded, making notes in a spiral notebook. "The loan application required detailed personal information, employment verification, and bank account numbers. In my experience, that level of access usually means family, close friends, or romantic partners. Anyone else would have had to work much harder to obtain this information."
He explained the investigation process with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd given this speech countless times. The police report would be filed and assigned a case number. The detective would contact Mountain Vista Capital and request copies of all application materials, including any documentation submitted to support the loan. If there were surveillance cameras at the bank where the fraudulent business account was opened, they would try to obtain footage. The process typically took several weeks to months. "What happens if we identify the person who did this?" Amelia asked. "That depends on several factors. The amount involved, nearly $100,000, makes this a felony. But if it's a family member and you don't want to press charges, our options become limited. A lot of families try to handle these situations privately." Amelia left the police station with a case number and a growing sense that she was stepping into quicksand. Every action she took made the situation more real, more official, more irreversible. There would be no pretending this was a mistake or a coincidence once the investigation was underway. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss. "Meeting moved to 2 p.m. Need the Morrison proposal ready by then." The normalcy of work deadlines felt surreal. She was supposed to care about marketing strategies and client presentations, while her entire financial future hung in the balance. But she needed this job now more than ever. So she drove to the office and spent the morning pretending to be a functioning adult while her world crumbled in the background. During her lunch break, Amelia made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. She drove to Victoria's apartment complex in Old Town Scottsdale, a sleek development with desert landscaping and a fountain in the courtyard. The visitor parking spots were filled with luxury cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Victoria's building was all glass and steel, the kind of place featured in lifestyle magazines about modern Arizona living. Amelia had only visited twice since Victoria moved in, once for a housewarming party that felt more like a showcase than a celebration, and once to drop off birthday presents from their parents. Both times, she'd felt like a tourist in her sister's glamorous new life. The apartment itself was a study of expensive minimalism, white furniture, abstract art, a kitchen with granite countertops that had never seen serious cooking. Everything looked like it belonged in a showroom, perfect, but somehow lifeless. Victoria had always been stylish, but this level of coordinated luxury was new. "Amelia, what a surprise!" Victoria opened the door wearing yoga pants and a crop sweater that probably cost more than Amelia's car payment. She looked genuinely happy to see her, which made Amelia's mission that much harder. "Come in. I was just about to make smoothies. You have to try this new protein powder I got. It's supposed to be amazing for your skin."
The apartment smelled like expensive candles and the kind of cleaning products that came from high-end boutiques rather than grocery stores. Victoria's laptop was open on the dining table, surrounded by what looked like business documents and marketing materials. "Working on that presentation you mentioned?" Amelia asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Oh, that! Yeah, it's this huge opportunity with a wellness brand. They're looking for a comprehensive digital strategy, and if I land this contract, it could be life-changing." Victoria moved around the kitchen with the fluid confidence of someone who'd never doubted their place in the world. "Want to see the mood boards I've been working on?" She pulled up a sleek presentation on her laptop, professional layouts, branded graphics, detailed marketing timelines. It looked impressive, the kind of work that could justify serious consulting fees. But Amelia found herself studying the details, looking for clues, trying to determine if this was real business or elaborate fiction. "This is really good, Vicky. How did you learn to do all this design work?" "YouTube, mostly, and I took a couple of online courses. You know me, when I decide I want to learn something, I dive in completely." Victoria's smile was bright and genuine. "Actually, I was hoping you might give me some feedback. Your eye for design is so much better than mine." For 20 minutes, they sat side by side looking at marketing strategies and color palettes. Victoria asked thoughtful questions about font choices and layout balance. She laughed at Amelia's suggestions and genuinely seemed grateful for the input. It felt exactly like the sister relationship Amelia had always wanted. Collaborative, supportive, built on mutual respect, which made what she had to do next feel like betrayal. "Vicky, can I ask you something kind of personal?" "Of course, we're sisters. Ask me anything." this apartment, the car, all the trips you've been taking, I'm not judging. I'm just curious about how business has been so good. I mean, you're doing really well, and I'm proud of you. But the numbers seem... I'm searching for diplomatic words. It seems like a lot of success very quickly. Victoria's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The bright smile remained, but something behind her eyes became more guarded. What do you mean? I'm just wondering if there's something I could learn from you. Like, are there specific types of clients that pay really well? Or maybe you got a big signing bonus with that promotion you mentioned? It's been a combination of things. The promotion came with equity participation, so when the company does well, I do well. Plus, I've been doing some freelance work on the side, and honestly, I've been smarter about leveraging credit to invest in myself. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money, you know? Leveraging credit. The phrase sent a chill through Amelia's chest. What kind of credit? Just business loans, investor funding, that kind of thing. It's all very standard in entrepreneurship. Victoria closed her laptop, the gesture casual but decisive. Why all the questions? Are you thinking about starting something on your side? Amelia felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. She could pull back now, apologize for being nosy, and continue pretending everything was normal. Or she could jump and ask a question that would change everything between them. Vicky, have you ever used anyone else's information for business applications? Like maybe listed me as a reference or something? The silence stretched for several seconds. Victoria's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Confusion, calculation, something that might have been guilt. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled.
I got a call from TransUnion yesterday. Someone applied for a business loan using my identity. Almost $100,000. Amelia's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The person who did it knew everything about me. My social security number, where I work, my bank account information. It had to be someone close to me. Victoria stared at her for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. And you think I did it? I don't know what to think, but the timing is weird, you know? You suddenly have all this money right around the same time someone steals my identity for a huge business loan. Amelia's words came out in a rush, months of suppressed worry and confusion finally finding voice. I'm trying to understand how this could have happened, and you're the only person in my life who's suddenly living like you have access to a lot of money. Victoria stood up and walked to the window, her back to Amelia. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I can't believe you would accuse me of something like this, Victoria said finally. I'm your sister. I would never hurt you. Then help me figure out who did. Amelia's voice was pleading now. If it wasn't you, then someone else has access to my personal information. Maybe we were both targeted. Maybe someone got into your accounts and mine. I think you should leave. The words were quiet but final. Victoria turned around, and her face had transformed into something Amelia barely recognized. Cold, distant, hurt, but also angry. Vicky, please! I'm not trying to accuse you. I'm just scared and confused and trying to understand what happened to my life. You came here because you think I stole your identity to get money. That's exactly what you're doing, accusing me. And it's disgusting that you would think I'm capable of something like that. Amelia gathered her purse and keys, her hands shaking. I've filed a police report. They're going to investigate, and they'll figure out who did this. Good. I hope they do. And when they find out it wasn't me, I hope you feel terrible about what you just did to our relationship. The drive home was a blur of tears and traffic. Amelia had crossed a threshold she couldn't uncross. Whether Victoria was guilty or innocent, their sister relationship would never be the same. The confrontation had resolved nothing and possibly destroyed everything. But as she replayed the conversation in her mind, one detail kept nagging at her. When she'd asked about using credit to invest, Victoria had said business loans, plural. And when directly confronted about the identity theft, Victoria hadn't seemed surprised by the specific details, the amount, the type of loan, the business purpose. She'd seemed prepared, like someone who'd been expecting this conversation. That evening, Amelia called Detective Morales and asked him to expedite the request for surveillance footage from banks in the Scottsdale area. She also asked if there was a way to trace where the loan money had been spent after it was deposited. The investigation was officially underway. There would be no more pretending, no more hoping this would resolve itself quietly. Amelia had committed to finding the truth, even if that truth destroyed her family in the process. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the faded, glow-in-the-dark stars, Amelia realized that she'd become someone she didn't recognize. Suspicious, investigative, willing to confront people she loved. The old Amelia would have accepted Victoria's denial and found ways to blame herself for being paranoid. But the old Amelia hadn't been responsible for nearly $100,000 in fraudulent debt. The old Amelia hadn't learned that trust could be weaponized and that family loyalty could be a one-way street. Tomorrow, she would continue the investigation, follow the money trail, and prepare for whatever truth emerged. Tonight, she grieved for the sister relationship she'd lost and the innocence that had died with it.
The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Marcus Chen, Victoria's new boyfriend with the investment firm. Amelia had been dreading Sunday dinner all week, unsure how to face her family after the confrontation with Victoria. But when she arrived at her parents' house, she found Marcus alone in the living room, scrolling through his phone while mariachi music drifted from the kitchen. "You must be the famous little sister," Marcus said, standing to shake her hand. He was tall and lean, with the kind of confident bearing that came from years of making financial decisions that affected other people's money. "Victoria talks about you constantly. She's so proud of how responsible and smart you are." The word responsible felt like a cruel joke given the current circumstances. Amelia managed a polite smile and asked where Victoria was. "She's helping your mom with something in the kitchen. I think they're debating proper spice levels." Marcus laughed easily. "Can I ask you something? Victoria mentioned you work in marketing. Do you know anything about business loan applications?" Amelia's blood went cold. "Why do you ask?" "She's been asking me for advice about expanding her consulting business. Apparently, she's looking into some significant funding, like 6 figures, and wanted to know about different lenders and application processes." Marcus lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I'm a little concerned about how fast she wants to scale. Good businesses usually grow more gradually." "What kind of advice did you give her?" "I told her to be very careful about personal guarantees and to make sure her business structure was solid before taking on major debt. I also mentioned that most legitimate lenders require extensive documentation and will verify everything thoroughly." He paused, studying Amelia's face. "Is everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before Amelia could respond, Victoria appeared in the doorway, her smile bright, but her eyes immediately focusing on the space between Amelia and Marcus with laser intensity. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" Victoria's tone was light, but there was something watchful in her posture. "Just getting to know each other," Marcus said easily. "I was telling Amelia about that business expansion you mentioned." The change in Victoria's expression was almost imperceptible, a tiny tightening around her eyes, a barely noticeable shift in her smile. But Amelia caught it, and in that moment she knew with absolute certainty that her suspicions were correct. Dinner was torture. Victoria performed perfectly, charming their parents, asking about their father's work, complimenting their mother's cooking. She told stories about her recent client successes and her plans for expanding her business. She showed affection towards Marcus and included Amelia in conversations as if nothing had happened between them. But Amelia noticed things she'd missed before. How Victoria deflected specific questions about her work, how she changed the subject when Marcus asked about her business license and tax structure, how she excused herself to take a client call that lasted 15 minutes
and left her slightly agitated. After dinner, while their parents showed Marcus old family photos, Amelia followed Victoria onto the back patio. "We need to talk," Amelia said quietly. "I thought we already said everything we needed to say." Victoria's voice was cool, controlled. "Marcus mentioned you've been asking about business loan applications, six-figure amounts. Doesn't that seem like a strange coincidence?" Victoria turned to face her, and for a moment, her mask slipped completely. Amelia saw something desperate and trapped in her sister's eyes, something that looked almost like relief at being caught.
"You have no idea what you're talking about," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The police are getting surveillance footage from banks. They're tracing where the money went after it was deposited. It's only a matter of time before they figure out the truth." Amelia kept her voice low, but urgent. "If you did this, if you took that loan in my name, you need to tell me now, before this gets worse." Victoria stared at her for a long moment, then looked away toward the desert landscape beyond their parents' backyard fence. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." Everything was falling apart. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "The consulting business was failing. I had maxed out every credit card, and the rent on the apartment was due. I was about to lose everything." The admission hung between them like a live wire. Amelia felt simultaneously vindicated and devastated. Being right about her sister's betrayal brought no satisfaction, only a hollow ache in her chest. "So, you stole my identity." "I borrowed it." Victoria's voice was defensive now. "I was going to pay it back before you ever found out. The business plan was solid. It still is. I just needed capital to make it work." $97,000, Victoria. That's not borrowing. That's identity theft. That's a felony. "I know what it is," Victoria snapped, then immediately looked toward the house to make sure no one had heard. "Do you think I wanted to do this? Do you think this was my first choice? What happened to all the money from your promotion? The equity participation you mentioned?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "There was no promotion. I lost my job 3 months ago. The whole company folded. They weren't paying their bills and half the clients had already left. I've been freelancing since then, but it's barely enough to cover the apartment." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The expensive lifestyle, the designer clothes, the weekend trips, all of it financed with stolen money and mounting debt. The Audi? The apartment? All those Instagram posts? Fake it till you make it, right? That's what all the business influencers say. I thought if I looked successful, if I projected the right image, the real success would follow. But it just kept getting worse. The car payments, the rent, the credit card minimums. I was drowning. "So you decided to drag me down with you?" "I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. The loan was supposed to be the solution, not the problem. I had clients lined up, contracts ready to sign. It should have worked." Amelia stared at her sister, trying to reconcile this desperate, defeated person with the confident woman who'd walked into their parents' house 2 hours earlier. Where's the money now? Some of it went to paying off the credit cards. Some of it went to rent and car payments. There's probably about $60,000 left in the business account. I was going to use it to actually start the consulting business, make it legitimate, with my stolen identity as the foundation. I was going to transfer everything to my name once the business was established. You would never have been responsible for anything. But I am responsible. Right now, today, I'm legally obligated to repay a loan I never applied for. The first payment is due in 6 days, and I don't have $1,800. Victoria's face crumpled. "I'll make the payment. I'll figure something out. With what money? You just told me you're broke." They stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of the situation settling between them. From inside the house, they could hear their father laughing at something Marcus had said, their mother offering more coffee. The normalcy of the sounds felt like a mockery. What happens now? Victoria asked finally. "You're going to tell Marcus you need to leave. Then you're going to drive to the police station and confess to Detective Morales. You're going to turn over whatever's left of the money and cooperate fully with the investigation." "Amelia, please. If I get arrested, I'll lose everything. My career, my reputation, any chance of fixing this." "You already lost everything when you decided to steal my identity. The only question now is whether you're going to keep lying or start trying to make this right." Victoria was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "I never meant for this to happen. I love you and I'm so sorry." "I know you're sorry, but sorry doesn't pay the loan back. Sorry doesn't fix my credit or give me back the trust I had in my family. What about Mom and Dad? This is going to destroy them." The question hit Amelia like a physical glow. She'd been so focused on her own betrayal and financial crisis that she hadn't fully considered how this would devastate their parents. Their pride in Victoria's success, their faith in family loyalty, their belief that they'd raise daughters who would always protect each other. All of it would be shattered. "They're going to find out eventually," Amelia said quietly. "The investigation is already underway. The only choice is whether they hear it from us or from the police." Victoria nodded miserably. "Can we tell them together after Marcus leaves?" "No. You're going to confess to the police first. Then we'll figure out how to tell Mom and Dad." Amelia's voice was firm, despite the grief crushing her chest. "I won't be part of covering this up or managing the timeline to make it easier for you." They went back inside, where Victoria performed her final act of the evening, apologizing to Marcus for cutting the visit short, claiming she had an early client call in the morning. She hugged their parents goodbye, telling them she loved them with an intensity that made their mother comment later about how affectionate Victoria had become. Amelia watched her sister leave, knowing it might be the last time she saw Victoria as a free person. The betrayal was complete now, documented and confessed. Tomorrow the legal consequences would begin. But tonight, sitting in the living room with her parents and Marcus, Amelia felt the full weight of what she'd lost. Not just financial security or trust in her sister, but the entire structure of her family as she had understood it. Victoria's arrest would send shockwaves through their extended family, their church community, their neighborhood. Everyone who'd celebrated Victoria's success would learn it was built on lies and stolen identity. Marcus left an hour later, still unaware that his girlfriend was about to confess to a felony. Their parents went to bed happy, talking about how nice it was to have both daughters together and how much they liked Victoria's new boyfriend. Amelia sat alone in the living room until nearly midnight, staring at family photos and trying to memorize this last night of innocence before everything changed forever.
Monday morning brought the kind of call that changes everything. Amelia was at her desk, mechanically responding to emails while waiting to hear whether Victoria had actually gone to the police station as promised, when Detective Morales' number appeared on her phone. "Ms. Rodriguez, your sister came in this morning and provided a full confession. She's being processed for booking on charges of identity theft and fraud. I need you to come in to provide a victim impact statement and to discuss the recovery process." The words should have brought relief, but instead, Amelia felt like she was drowning. Victoria had actually done it, confessed, been arrested, started the machinery of justice that would now grind forward regardless of family consequences. There was no taking it back. No finding a private solution, no protecting their parents from the devastation that was coming. "What happens to her now?" Amelia asked. "She'll likely be released on bail pending trial, assuming she can make the bond amount. Given the dollar amount involved and the fact that she confessed, she's looking at serious felony charges. If convicted, she could face up to 5 years in prison." 5 years. Amelia tried to picture her sister in a prison uniform, tried to imagine family dinners without Victoria's laugh, tried to envision explaining to future children why their aunt was in jail.
The images wouldn't form. They were too foreign, too devastating to process. And the money? She provided account information for the business account where most of the remaining funds are held. We'll work with the bank to freeze the account and begin recovery proceedings. She claims there's approximately $60,000 left, which should go toward paying down the loan balance. Still leaving $37,000. Amelia did the math quickly. Even with the recovered money, she'd still owe more than her annual salary on a loan she'd never wanted. The monthly payments would still be over $1,000, still impossible on her current income. By noon, the news had spread through their extended family network with the speed and devastation of wildfire. Their cousin Rosa called first, her voice thick with shock and disbelief. Then Aunt Carmen, demanding to know if the rumors were true. Then their grandmother, weeping in Spanish about how this would kill their grandfather's already weak heart. Amelia's mother called at 12:47 p.m., sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Mija, someone is saying Victoria was arrested. Tell me it's not true. Tell me there's been a mistake." The conversation was the worst 15 minutes of Amelia's life, explaining identity theft to her immigrant parents who'd built their entire worldview around family loyalty and honest work. Watching her mother's understanding dawn as she realized one daughter had betrayed the other in the most fundamental way possible. Listening to her father take the phone and demand details in a voice that shook with rage and heartbreak. "She stole from you? From her own sister? How is this possible?" "I don't know, Papa. I'm trying to understand it too. We raised her better than this. We taught both of you that family protects family, that we take care of each other. How could she do this to you? How could she do this to us?" The questions had no answers, at least none that would provide comfort. Amelia promised to come home after work, knowing she'd find her parents aged by grief and confusion, struggling to reconcile the daughter they'd raised with the criminal she'd become. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I'm sorry." Amelia stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Sorry was a word for minor transgressions, for accidentally bumping into someone or forgetting a birthday. It wasn't big enough to cover identity theft, financial ruin, and the destruction of a family's foundation. That afternoon brought more devastating news. Human Resources at Henderson Marketing called Amelia into a meeting that felt like a tribunal. Her supervisor, Janet Walsh, sat across from her with a folder and an expression of uncomfortable professionalism. "Amelia, we've become aware of some legal issues that may affect your employment here. Our policy requires disclosure of any criminal investigations involving employees, particularly those related to financial crimes."
"But I'm the victim. I didn't commit any crime." "We understand that, and we're not questioning your integrity. However, the situation creates complications. If this case goes to trial, you may need significant time off for court appearances, depositions, and legal proceedings. Additionally, if your credit score is affected by these charges, it could impact your ability to handle client accounts that require financial responsibility verification." The meeting lasted 20 minutes and ended with Amelia being placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the resolution of the case. Not fired, but not employed either. Caught in a professional limbo that made her financial situation even more desperate. She sat in her car in the Henderson Marketing parking lot, staring at the building where she'd worked for 2 years, where she'd planned to build her career and earn the promotions that would eventually let her afford her own apartment. All of that was gone now, derailed by her sister's choices and the ripple effects that kept spreading outward like cracks in glass. Her phone rang. Marcus. "Amelia, I just heard about Victoria's arrest on the news. What the hell is going on? The reporter said something about identity theft and fraud. This has to be a mistake." The news. Of course it would make the local news. A young, attractive woman arrested for stealing nearly $100,000 from her own sister. It had all the elements of a story that would capture public attention and social media outrage. "It's not a mistake, Marcus. She confessed." The silence stretched for so long that Amelia thought the call had dropped. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was hollow. "She used your identity to get a business loan? $97,000. She needed money to maintain her lifestyle after she lost her job." Lost her job? She told me about a promotion just last week. She showed me contracts she was working on, clients she was meeting with. The professional implications were hitting him in real time. My reputation, my firm, if people think I was involved or that I didn't know she was a fraud? Amelia almost felt sorry for him. Marcus was another casualty of Victoria's choices, another person whose life had been disrupted by lies and stolen money. The damage extended far beyond just the Rodriguez family. After Marcus hung up, Amelia drove to her parents' house and found exactly what she'd expected. Her mother crying at the kitchen table while her father paced the living room with the restless energy of someone who needed to fix something but didn't know how. "The neighbors are talking," her mother said without looking up. "Mrs. Patterson came over to ask if the girl on the news was really our Victoria. I had to tell her yes, had to explain that our daughter is a criminal." "A mistake, Mama. A terrible mistake, but she's still our daughter." "A mistake?" Her father's voice was sharp with anger. "Stealing from her sister is not a mistake. It's a betrayal. It's choosing money over family, greed over love." They sat in the living room, where Victoria had charmed Marcus just 24 hours earlier, where family photos still showed two smiling daughters at graduations and birthday parties. The contrast between those images and their current reality felt surreal. "What happens to you now, mija?" her mother asked. "How do you pay back money you never borrowed?" "I don't know. The police recovered some of it, but I'm still responsible for the rest. And I lost my job today. Well, they put me on leave, but it's the same thing." Her father stopped pacing. "You lost your job because of what she did?" "It's complicated. They're worried about the legal proceedings and how it might affect my work." "So she steals your money and your job?" Her father's voice was getting louder, his accent thickening the way it did when he was really upset. "What else does she want to take from you? Your home? Your future?" "Carlos, please," her mother said quietly. "No, Maria, I will not be quiet about this. She destroyed her sister's life for money. Money, as if money is more important than family, more important than the love we gave her, the sacrifices we made." Amelia had never seen her father this angry. He was usually the calm one, the one who mediated disputes and found peaceful solutions. But Victoria's betrayal had shattered something fundamental in his worldview. "She's still our daughter," her mother repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is she? Because the daughter we raised would never do this. The daughter we raised understood that family comes first, that you protect the people you love." He looked at Amelia with an expression of profound sadness. "I failed. Somewhere, somehow, I failed to teach her what matters." "You didn't fail, Papa. This isn't your fault." "Then whose fault is it? How does a good girl from a good family become someone who steals from her own sister?" The question hung in the air without an answer. Victoria's choices were her own, but they'd been shaped by pressures and values that came from somewhere. The culture of social media success, the pressure to appear wealthy, the idea that image mattered more than reality, all of it had contributed to creating someone who could justify stealing from family. That night, Amelia lay in her childhood bedroom, feeling like her entire life had been erased and rewritten as a cautionary tale. Her job was gone, her credit was ruined, her family was shattered, and her sister was facing prison time. The careful, responsible life she'd built had been demolished in less than a week by someone she trusted completely. Her phone buzzed with notifications. Facebook friends who'd seen the news story, college acquaintances expressing shock and sympathy, coworkers who were suddenly very glad they weren't in her position. The story was spreading beyond Phoenix, picked up by national news outlets as an example of family financial fraud. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Meetings with lawyers, discussions with the bank about loan restructuring, phone calls with creditors who didn't care that she was a victim. The crisis was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But this night, for the first time since this nightmare started, Amelia felt something besides fear and confusion. She felt angry, not just at Victoria, but at the entire system that had allowed this to happen, at the culture that encouraged people to fake success until they made it, at her own naivete in trusting someone just because they shared her DNA. The anger felt clean and powerful in a way that fear never had. Tomorrow she would start fighting back.
The breakthrough came from an unexpected ally, Patricia Kensington, a victims' rights attorney who'd seen Amelia's story on the news and recognized something the media had missed. Patricia had built her practice around cases exactly like this: family financial fraud that left victims drowning in debt they'd never chosen to take on. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'd like to offer you pro bono representation," Patricia said during their phone call on Wednesday morning. "Your case has several elements that make it particularly egregious, and frankly, I'm tired of seeing banks and lenders get away with inadequate verification processes." Patricia was a force of nature. 60-something, silver-haired, with the kind of sharp intelligence that came from 30 years of courtroom battles. She'd made her reputation taking on financial institutions that prioritized profits over protection, and she'd won more cases than she'd lost. "The dirty secret about identity theft," Patricia explained during their first meeting in her downtown Phoenix office, "is that banks often have the tools to prevent it, but they don't use them because verification slows down the loan approval process. Speed equals profit in their world." Patricia had already begun investigating Mountain Vista Capital, and what she'd found was damning. The company had approved Victoria's loan application without requiring in-person verification, without calling Amelia's employer directly, and without conducting basic background checks that would have revealed Victoria's recent job loss and maxed out credit cards. "Your sister provided falsified employment records and bank statements, but any competent verification process would have caught the discrepancies," Patricia said, spreading documents across our conference table. Mountain Vista was so eager to make the loan that they essentially rubber-stamped an obviously fraudulent application. More importantly, Patricia had discovered that Mountain Vista Capital had been sued 12 times in the past 2 years for similar cases, loans approved with insufficient verification that turned out to be fraudulent. The company had a pattern of aggressive lending practices that prioritized volume over accuracy. "We're not just going after your sister," Patricia announced. "We're going after the lender who made this possible through negligent verification practices, and we're going to win." The legal strategy was complex but powerful. While Victoria remained criminally liable for the identity theft, Mountain Vista Capital could be held financially responsible for their role in enabling the fraud. If successful, the civil lawsuit could result in the loan being entirely forgiven, plus damages for the harm caused to Amelia's credit and employment. "But this will take time," Patricia warned. "Probably 18 months to 2 years. And it will be ugly. They'll try to blame you for not protecting your personal information adequately. They'll argue that family fraud is unpreventable and that you should have known what your sister was doing." Amelia signed the representation agreement that afternoon, feeling like she was finally fighting back instead of just surviving. For the first time since this nightmare began, she had an advocate, someone with the knowledge and resources to challenge the system that had failed her. The second breakthrough came from an unexpected source: social media. The local news story about Victoria's arrest had been picked up nationally, and suddenly Amelia found herself at the center of a conversation about family financial abuse and lender accountability. Her email inbox filled with messages from other victims sharing similar stories. Sarah Martinez from Denver wrote about her brother using her identity for a $50,000 car loan. David Chen from Seattle described how his ex-wife had opened multiple credit cards in his name during their divorce. Jennifer Williams from Miami detailed a 3-year battle to clear her credit after her mother had used her Social Security number to open utility accounts and rent apartments. The stories were heartbreaking, but also empowering.
Amelia realized she wasn't alone, wasn't the first person to be betrayed by family, and wasn't powerless to fight back. These people had survived their financial abuse and rebuilt their lives. Some had even helped change laws to better protect victims. "You should consider speaking publicly about this," suggested Maria Santos, a financial crimes advocate who'd reached out after seeing the news coverage. "Your case has elements that could help push for legislative changes in lender verification requirements." Maria worked for a nonprofit organization that lobbied for stronger identity theft protections and victim rights. She invited Amelia to speak at an upcoming conference on financial fraud, where legislators and banking officials would be discussing policy reforms. "Your story illustrates how current laws favor lenders over victims," Maria explained. "When someone steals your identity for a loan, you're immediately responsible for the debt while the investigation drags on for months or years. That's backwards. The burden should be on the lender to prove the loan was legitimate." The speaking opportunity terrified and energized Amelia in equal measure. She'd never spoken publicly about anything, let alone testified before lawmakers about policy changes. But the anger that had been building since Victoria's arrest was transforming into something more productive, a determination to prevent other families from experiencing this devastation. The third breakthrough was personal. Amelia's supervisor at Henderson Marketing, Janet Walsh, called on Thursday with news that changed everything about her employment situation. "Amelia, after reviewing your case with our legal department and the company's insurance carrier, we've determined that you're the victim of a crime that occurred entirely outside of your employment with us," Janet explained. "We're reinstating you immediately with full back pay for the days you were on leave." The decision had come after Patricia Kensington contacted Henderson Marketing's legal department, explaining that placing crime victims on administrative leave could constitute discrimination under victim rights laws. The company had quickly reversed course to avoid potential liability. "Additionally," Janet continued, "our executive team has discussed your situation, and we'd like to offer you a promotion to senior marketing coordinator with a 15% salary increase. Your handling of this crisis has demonstrated exactly the kind of resilience and integrity we value." The promotion meant more than just additional income. It meant recognition that she was capable of handling adversity, that her personal crisis hadn't diminished her professional value. For the first time in weeks, Amelia felt like her career was moving forward instead of being derailed by her sister's choices. But the most significant breakthrough was internal. On Friday evening, as Amelia sat in her childhood bedroom, reviewing legal documents and preparing for her speech at the financial fraud conference, she realized she'd become someone entirely different from the person she'd been 2 weeks earlier. The old Amelia had been careful, anxious, always worried about making mistakes or taking risks. She'd built her life around avoiding problems rather than solving them. She'd trusted people because questioning them felt uncomfortable, and she'd accepted situations because changing them required courage she wasn't sure she possessed. The new Amelia was still careful, but strategically rather than fearfully. She'd learned to ask hard questions, to demand accountability, to fight for herself when no one else would. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed her had also forced her to discover strengths she'd never known she had. "You seem different," her mother observed as they made dinner together that Friday night. "Stronger somehow."
"I had to get stronger. Nobody else was going to fight for me. Your father and we feel so guilty about this. We raised Victoria to believe family was everything, but we failed to teach her that family loyalty works both ways." Amelia stopped chopping vegetables and looked at her mother. Really looked at her. Maria Rodriguez had aged visibly in the past week, new lines around her eyes, a heaviness in her posture that spoke to the weight of disappointment and shame she was carrying. "Mama, you didn't fail. Victoria made her own choices. You and Papa gave us both the same values, the same love, the same opportunities. I chose to honor those values, and she chose to abandon them. That's not your fault." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "But how do we move forward? How do we rebuild our family when one daughter is facing prison and the other daughter was her victim? It was a question Amelia had been grappling with since Victoria's arrest. How do you forgive someone who's caused devastating harm? How do you maintain family connections when trust has been shattered? How do you protect yourself while still leaving room for eventual healing? I don't know if we can rebuild what we had, Amelia said honestly, but maybe we can build something different, something based on honesty instead of just loyalty, something that acknowledges that people can make terrible choices and still be family. Over the weekend, Amelia made 2 difficult phone calls. The first was to Victoria, who was staying with a friend after being released on bail, working at a coffee shop to pay for her legal fees. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Victoria said, her voice small and defeated. "I know I destroyed everything between us." "You hurt me badly, Vicky. You betrayed my trust in ways I'm still trying to understand. But I want you to know that I hope you get help, and I hope you figure out how to build a life based on honesty instead of lies." "Does that mean, can we eventually?" "I don't know what we can eventually have, but I know that hating you hurts me more than it hurts you, so I'm choosing not to hate you. That's not the same as trusting you or wanting you in my life right now, but it's a start." The second call was to Detective Morales to let him know about Patricia Kensington's investigation into Mountain Vista Capital and the potential for systemic fraud involving multiple victims. This could be bigger than just your case. If we can prove a pattern of negligent lending practices, it could result in criminal charges against the company executives, not just the individual fraudsters. That weekend, Amelia also did something she'd never done before. She started a blog. Writing about her experience felt both therapeutic and purposeful. If her story could help other people recognize the warning signs of family financial abuse or encourage victims to fight back instead of accepting responsibility for crimes committed against them, then something positive could come from this devastation. The first post was titled, "When Family Becomes the Enemy, My Sister Stole My Identity and How I'm Fighting Back." Within 24 hours, it had been shared hundreds of times and generated dozens of comments from other victims sharing their own stories. As she prepared for bed on Sunday night, Amelia looked around her childhood bedroom one last time. Next weekend, she would be moving into her own apartment, a modest one-bedroom place she could afford with her promotion and the confidence that came from knowing she could handle whatever challenges arose. The glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling seemed brighter somehow. Or maybe she was just seeing them with new eyes. Eyes that had learned to spot deception, to demand justice, and to find strength in the darkest moments. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in her fight against Mountain Vista Capital, more preparation for the conference speech that could influence policy changes, and continued work on rebuilding her credit and her life. But tonight, for the first time since this nightmare began, Amelia felt genuinely hopeful about her future. The courtroom in downtown Phoenix felt like a battlefield as Amelia took her seat behind Patricia Kensington on a crisp November morning. 18 months had passed since that devastating phone call from TransUnion, and today would determine whether Mountain Vista Capital would be held accountable for their role in enabling Victoria's fraud. The defense table was crowded with expensive suits. 3 attorneys representing Mountain Vista Capital, led by Harrison Webb, a partner from one of Phoenix's most prestigious corporate law firms. They'd spent the past year arguing that the company had followed industry-standard verification procedures and couldn't be held responsible for sophisticated fraud committed by a family member. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Patricia began her opening statement, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd fought these battles dozens of times before. "This case isn't about whether Victoria Rodriguez committed identity theft. She did, and she's serving time for that crime. This case is about whether Mountain Vista Capital chose profits over protection when they approved a fraudulent loan without conducting basic verification that any responsible lender would require. Patricia had spent months building an airtight case. Expert witnesses would testify about industry standards for loan verification. Former Mountain Vista employees would describe internal pressure to approve loans quickly without thorough checks. Most damaging of all, Patricia had uncovered internal emails showing that company executives knew their verification process was inadequate, but chose not to improve it because stricter checks would reduce loan volume. The trial lasted 6 days. Amelia testified on the third day, describing the devastating impact of discovering that someone had stolen her identity and left her responsible for a massive debt. She explained how the inadequate verification process had enabled her sister's fraud, how a single phone call to her actual employer or a basic background check would have revealed the false information on the application. If Mountain Vista Capital had simply called Henderson Marketing to verify my employment, they would have learned that no Amelia Rodriguez worked there as a business owner or independent contractor. If they had required in-person verification or checked the bank statements more carefully, they would have discovered that the supporting documents were falsified, Amelia testified. The defense attorney, Harrison Webb, tried to portray Amelia as partially responsible for the fraud, suggesting she should have better protected her personal information and monitored her credit more closely. But Patricia had prepared for these attacks, and Amelia remained calm under cross-examination. Mr. Webb, are you suggesting that families should treat each other as potential criminals and guard their personal information from their own sisters? Amelia asked when he questioned her about sharing financial details with Victoria. I'm suggesting that what reasonable precautions protect against someone photographing your mail when they visit your parents' house? What reasonable precautions protect against a family member who has your social security number memorized for years of helping with tax documents? Should I have refused to let my sister know where I worked or what bank I used? The moment felt like vindication for every victim who'd ever been blamed for trusting the people they loved. The jury seemed to respond to Amelia's composure and the fundamental unfairness of holding victims responsible for crimes committed against them. The expert testimony was devastating to Mountain Vista's defense. Dr. Rebecca Sterling, a financial fraud specialist from Arizona State University, explained that industry best practices required verification procedures the company had completely ignored. A loan of this magnitude should have triggered multiple verification requirements: in-person documentation review, direct employer contact, credit history analysis, and business plan evaluation. Mountain Vista Capital performed none of these standard checks.
More damaging was the testimony from Jake Morrison, a former Mountain Vista loan processor who'd quit after becoming uncomfortable with the company's practices. Jake described internal quotas that prioritized loan approval speed over accuracy, and management directives to find ways to say yes rather than thoroughly vet applications. We were told that our job was to approve loans, not to be detectives, Jake testified. If the paperwork looked reasonable on the surface, we were expected to push it through. Asking too many questions or requiring additional verification was seen as failing to meet targets. The most explosive moment came when Patricia introduced the internal emails she'd obtained through discovery. Company executives had discussed their inadequate verification process in writing, acknowledging that it made them vulnerable to fraud, but deciding that the profit margin on quick approvals outweighed the risk of occasional losses. These emails show a deliberate choice to prioritize profits over protection, Patricia argued. Mountain Vista Capital knew their process was inadequate, but they calculated that the money they'd save by not implementing proper verification would exceed the cost of dealing with fraud cases like this one. The defense tried to argue that the company had relied on third-party verification services and couldn't be expected to catch every instance of sophisticated fraud. But Patricia countered with evidence that the verification services Mountain Vista used were the cheapest available, known for minimal checks rather than thorough investigation. On the final day of trial, both sides delivered closing arguments that felt like the culmination of everything Amelia had fought for since discovering the fraud.
Harrison Webb made a last attempt to shift blame, arguing that Victoria's deception was so sophisticated that no reasonable verification process would have caught it. Patricia's closing was a masterpiece of righteous anger and legal precision. The defense wants you to believe that a 27-year-old woman with no business experience and maxed-out credit cards somehow masterminded a fraud so sophisticated that a financial institution with decades of experience couldn't detect it. The truth is much simpler. Mountain Vista Capital chose not to look too closely because looking closely would have slowed down their profit machine. The jury deliberated for 8 hours over 2 days. When they returned to the courtroom on Friday afternoon, Amelia felt like her entire future hung in the balance. A victory would mean not just financial relief, but validation that victims shouldn't be held responsible for crimes committed against them by people they trusted. On the count of negligent lending practices resulting in financial harm, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Amelia Rodriguez, the jury foreman announced. We award damages in the amount of $150,000, which includes full forgiveness of the fraudulent loan, compensation for lost wages and credit damage, and punitive damages for the defendant's reckless disregard for industry standards. The courtroom erupted. Amelia felt Patricia's hand squeeze her shoulder as reporters scribbled notes and Mountain Vista's legal team huddled in urgent conversation. After 18 months of legal battles, document reviews, and depositions, justice had finally been served. But the victory extended far beyond Amelia's individual case. Within hours of the verdict, other victims of Mountain Vista's negligent lending practices began contacting Patricia's office. The precedent set by Amelia's case would make it easier for other fraud victims to hold lenders accountable for inadequate verification processes. That evening, Amelia stood at the podium of the Arizona State Capitol's largest conference room addressing the Financial Crimes Policy Reform Summit that had been organized around her advocacy work. The room was filled with state legislators, banking officials, victim advocates, and survivors of financial fraud.
18 months ago, I was a victim who felt powerless and alone, Amelia began, her voice steady and clear. Today, I'm a survivor who's proven that victims can fight back and win. But individual victories aren't enough. We need systemic change to prevent these crimes from happening in the first place. Her speech outlined specific policy recommendations that had emerged from her case: mandatory verification standards for high-dollar loans, stronger penalties for lenders who ignored industry best practices, and automatic fraud alerts that would notify victims when someone attempted to use their identity for financial transactions. The current system places the burden on victims to prove they didn't commit crimes against themselves. That's backwards. The burden should be on lenders to prove they conducted adequate verification before approving loans in someone's name. The response was immediate and overwhelming. State Senator Jenith Martinez announced that she would introduce the Rodriguez Protection Act in the next legislative session, incorporating many of Amelia's recommendations. Banking officials who'd initially resisted reform measures began discussing voluntary implementation of stronger verification standards. After the speech, Amelia was surrounded by other survivors sharing their stories, legislators asking for additional details, and advocates discussing collaboration on future reform efforts. Maria Santos, the financial crimes advocate who'd first encouraged Amelia to speak publicly, pulled her aside. "You've started something here that's going to help thousands of people," Maria said. "This is just the beginning." Later that night, Amelia stood on the balcony of her downtown Phoenix apartment, looking out at the city lights and reflecting on how completely her life had changed. The scared, betrayed young woman who'd received that first call from TransUnion felt like a different person, someone she remembered but could barely recognize. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from friends, colleagues, and fellow advocates. Her parents had called earlier, their voices thick with pride as they described watching the news coverage of the trial verdict. Even some extended family members who'd initially treated her with suspicion had reached out to apologize and offer support. Victoria had sent a single text message: "I saw the news. I'm glad you won. You deserve justice." Amelia stared at the message for a long time before responding, "Thank you. I hope you're doing better." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it wasn't hatred either. Victoria was serving an 18-month sentence in minimum security prison, participating in financial responsibility programs, and working toward a degree and addiction counseling. Their relationship might never recover completely, but the possibility of eventual healing no longer seemed impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, working with legislators to refine the proposed Protection Act, helping other victims navigate the legal system, and continuing to build the advocacy organization she'd started with other survivors. The fight for systemic change was far from over. But tonight, Amelia allowed herself to savor the victory. Justice had been served, precedent had been set, and change was coming. Most importantly, she'd discovered that being a victim didn't have to be permanent. With enough determination and the right support, victims could become advocates, survivors could become leaders, and individual tragedies could become catalysts for positive change. The glow-in-the-dark stars from her childhood bedroom were long gone, replaced by the real stars visible from her balcony and the city lights that represented opportunity and possibility. The future looked brighter than it had in a very long time.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.